Allahu Akbar.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah. Before I start on the lessons that I want to share with you, coming out of the discussion that Jaafar had with Najjashi, I want to make a case for why we should, in our path on civic engagement, in our public service effort, why we should study the seerah, why this should be a lively topic of conversation in your MSAs or in your halaqas. First, you study the seerah because this is how you're going to love the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. To know him intimately is to study his life, not in terms of a timeline, not in terms of when he was born and the battles he won and then when he died, but the intimate interactions and relationships that he had and how he responded to different situations. This is how you love his character and how you grow within yourself a desire to be like him, is by knowing him. The second is to understand the Quran. You really cannot understand the Quran if you don't understand the seerah, if you don't understand the human context that it was revealed into, that it was poured into, without understanding what was happening on the ground, because a lot of these ayahs were responding to real events. You won't have a deep understanding of what the Quran is teaching you. 3, we need a collective history that we all share. We all have backgrounds in different places, whether we are recent immigrants or we've been in America for 400 years. But what we do share is one common history in the seerah. To have one collective, united, common identity as Muslims, we need to have a common history. And the easiest way to take away people's collective identity is to take away their history. Ignoring the seerah has incredibly dangerous repercussions for our future. And 4, it's because it's relevant today. And that's what I'd like to talk about. What happened in that first generation, how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with poverty and wealth, weakness and strength, is incredibly relevant today. So don't study the seerah like it's ancient history. Don't study it as something that has nothing to do with you. Engage it actively. Discuss it. Debate its meaning. Make it a part of the way you think about what to do next, your vision for the future. And I encourage you to take this short piece of history that I'm going to share with you today and discuss it with others. Get different messages and different lessons than I'm going to be sharing with you. The story I want to share with you is so important because I would argue that it is the first Muslim victory over the Quraysh. And it was a moral victory, not a military victory. It was the power of the moral message of Islam that won over a powerful king to go against his long-held business allies to protect a group of what was considered at that time fugitives. Because they won him over, not because they were strong, not because they had anything to offer him in terms of material wealth. In fact, the Quraysh representative came with incredible gifts and reminded him of their long alliance. And yet he broke off that alliance and risked alienating these powerful people to protect this group who had come to him for refuge because he was won over by their moral strength. And that is an incredibly important message for us, because as American Muslims, we are not the strongest group in America, believe it or not. There's a lot of good reasons why people in power would want, or just the public in general, would see us more as a liability. than as a strength. But if our key strength is our moral strength, then things can change, and things will change. I'm going to start by reading you, in fact, just reading out loud what he said, what Jaafer Bin Abi Talib, who was heading a small delegation that was leaving Mecca, where they were persecuted, where they were prohibited and terrorized with violence for nothing other than saying our Lord is one. They left Mecca and went to what is now Ethiopia, Habasha, where the Prophet ﷺ told them there was a just king, a Christian king. His name was Najjashi. And in the court of Najjashi, they were called to explain themselves because members of the Quraysh had come and had demanded that they be turned over, that they were criminals, that they were fugitives, and that Najjashi had a responsibility to extradite them back to their homeland of Mecca so that they could be dealt with. And so here he was, literally risking being deported back to Mecca, where they were incredibly persecuted and no doubt risking torture and death upon return. And so he had this moment that he had to make this case for why this powerful king should protect them, and yet he had nothing to offer him in terms of alliance or a lucrative business trade agreement. And here's what he told him. Here's what he said in the court of Najjashi. "O king, we were a people in a state of ignorance and immorality, worshiping idols and eating the flesh of dead animals, committing all sorts of abominations and shameful deeds, breaking the ties of kinship, treating guests badly, and the strong among us exploited the weak. We remained in this state until Allah sent us a prophet, one of our own people whose lineage, truthfulness, trustworthiness, and integrity were well known to us. He called upon us to worship God alone and to renounce the stones and idols which our ancestors were used to worshiping besides God. He commanded us to speak the truth, to honor our promises, to be kind to our relations, our relatives, to be helpful to our neighbors, and to cease all forbidden acts, to abstain from bloodshed, to avoid obscenities and false witness, and not to appropriate any orphan's property or slander chaste women. He ordered us to worship God alone and not to associate anything with him, to uphold salah, to give zakah, and fast in the month of Ramadan. We believed in him and what he brought to us from Allah, and we follow him in what he has asked us, and we keep away from what he has forbidden us. Thereupon, O king, our people attacked us, visited the severest punishment on us to make us renounce our religion and take us back to the old ways of our ancestors. They oppressed us, made life intolerable for us, and obstructed us from observing our faith. So we left our country, choosing you before anyone else, desiring your protection and hoping to live in justice and in peace in your midst." The king then asked him to share something from what his prophet had brought or had claimed to be bringing from God. And very appropriately, Jaafer read from Surat Maryam, and at which time the king was moved to tears by the beauty of the words and gave them refuge after saying, "What you brought and what Jesus brought are two rays from the same niche." Now, there are so many lessons to draw from this historical incident. I'm going to just cover a few. First, what Jaafer focused on is in his interaction, in his introduction of Islam to this powerful king, was not the minutiae detail, but the impact the change, the transformational power of its message on the lives of real people. He focused on how it changed their way of life, how it changed their paradigm, how it changed them as individuals and the way they behaved. That made them honest, it made them just, it made them fair, and then how it changed the community as a collective. And so in our dawah, in our outreach, in our service, in our civic engagement, let us both teach and live the transformational power of Islam. What I love about how he interacted is he was so dignified, so confident, and yet humble in the same way. And I'm gonna touch on that in a minute. But there is not even a drop of apologetic rhetoric in what he said. Yet he was weak. And he had very little to offer in terms of material strength, and yet he had the dignity of the moral strength of his message. That kind of confidence laced with humility is what we have to radiate, because we have nothing to apologize for. We have nothing to apologize for except what you yourself have done as an individual, but for us to be collectively responsible for the guilt of individuals that claim to be among us is something we should strongly reject. The stance we have to take is as full and equal human beings with a moral message that the world needs. We are the ones that have something to give, not something to demand or something that we are in need of. Don't go to people in need of acceptance, because I am tired of hearing Muslims complaining that they don't feel welcomed in America. You only seek to feel welcomed when you are a guest, and you are not a guest. This is your home. Ask what you are doing to build and strengthen your home, to serve its weakest members. But don't wait for welcome, because you only ask, you only wait for the host to welcome you when you have internalized a guest status, when you have internalized a second-class status. So reject that and move forward. You are the strong here because you have this moral message and you have a responsibility to help the weak. We are sitting here in Baltimore where we just saw a militarized police force put forth an enormous, a degree of violence on civilians that would embarrass us if we saw it overseas. There's a really funny article that was circulating on Facebook that basically said how we would cover Baltimore if it were in another country. And it's exactly accurate. We would be denouncing the violence, the brutality of the police force. Where are we when the strong are hurting the weak? The second thing to draw from the way he interacted, because my time is limited, is his humility. When you analyze what he said, he focused entirely on himself and his society. Here's where we were going wrong. Here's where we corrected ourselves because of the message of Islam. He never once pointed to Najjashi and said, hey, you know what? You've got some serious problems that you need to work on. You have some real issues, and I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. It was teaching through example. Here's where we had a problem. I am most worried about myself, I am introspective, and I'm critiquing my own society, which I know best. And then here is how we were able to transform and reform ourselves through this message of Islam. How does this impact us? This country is our society. So we can critique our society, and we should, but from a position of humility. Now, one thing I want to impress upon us is, as a Muslim community, we have all the challenges. I'm so sorry to, if this is a surprise, I'm sorry to be the one to deliver this scary message. We have all of the problems of the wider society inside our community, unfortunately. So when we are trying to help and outreach, it has to be from a place of humility. We do have the moral message, but we are all weak and we are all struggling. We are all just trying our best to do the best we can for ourselves and our families. Come to civic engagement with humility. And finally, he understood his audience. He met the king where he was. He met his audience where they were, not compromising his message, but meeting people where they are, in what they care about, in what they're thinking about right now, rather than being completely self-absorbed. Here's what I feel like talking about, and if you don't understand, that's because you're not enlightened. That is absolutely the wrong attitude. What Jaafar did was he knew what would resonate with the king, what he was thinking, and he met him where he was, and then he took him slowly away to where he wanted him to go, led him through the shining example of that transformational message. Thank you very much.